Chapter 1. The Impossible Crime. It was one of those still London mornings in early May when the air had not yet decided between spring and mist, and Baker Street stood in a hush, broken only by the distant clatter of a milk cart and the scratch of a match struck indoors. I was at my writing desk, engaged in the modest task of revising some notes on the matter of the shoemaker's cipher. Minor but instructive affair, when the door to our sitting room swung open with such force that my pen skidded. Holmes stood in the doorway, a folded newspaper in one hand, the other holding a half-burnt pipe clenched loosely between two fingers. "Watson," he said, eyes alight with the gleam that I had come to know as the precursor to intellectual exhilaration. "Have you seen the morning edition of the Times?" "Not yet," I admitted, wiping the ink from my wrist. "I rather thought to enjoy a quiet morning for once." He handed me the paper, neatly creased open to page 5. Murder in the garden maze of Wilton Hall. Sir Giles Montgomery, noted horticulturist and former member of Parliament, was found dead this morning at the centre of the garden maze on his estate in Wiltshire. The cause of death is believed to be a single stab wound to the heart, inflicted at close range. The peculiar nature of the murder lies not only in the isolated location, but in the complete lack of footprints, either approaching or fleeing the scene. The gravel paths of the maze, laid 2 years prior, are notoriously sensitive to disturbance. And yet no sign of ingress or egress could be found save the victim's own. Inspector Gregson of Scotland Yard has been dispatched to assist local authorities. I looked up at Holmes, who had seated himself in his armchair, legs crossed, pipe now lit and curling smoke toward the ceiling. "Footprints," I said after a moment. "Or rather, the absence of them." "Just so," said Holmes, leaning forward. "A man is stabbed to death in a confined area. There is but one entrance to the maze, which he is seen entering at dusk. He is discovered dead at dawn. No footprints save his own. A locked room mystery only in open air. Have they ruled out suicide? Rather conclusively. The blade was removed, no weapon found. And more to the point, he was stabbed in the back. A rather spirited effort, even for the most determined of self-slayers." Holmes stood and crossed to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Wilton Hall, Watson. Have you heard of it?" I searched my memory. A Tudor estate, is it not? Known for its gardens? Indeed. And more relevantly, for its maze. Designed by the late Sir Giles himself 3 years of botanical obsession, resulting in a labyrinth that is both aesthetically charming and devilishly complex. Its hedges are 10 feet high, trimmed weekly, and contain precisely one route too, the center and back. It is, by all accounts, impossible to cheat one's way through without leaving a trace, unless the murderer flew in and out like a magpie. "Precisely," said Holmes, grinning. "The impracticality of every solution is what makes it worth our while." There was a tap at the door. Mrs. Hudson's familiar shuffle preceded her appearance. "A message, Mr. Holmes, from Scotland Yard, just arrived." He took it with a quick nod and unfolded the paper. His smile widened slightly. "Mr. Holmes, we require your immediate assistance. The local constabulary is baffled, and there are elements of this case which suggest deliberate staging. A man like Sir Giles made enemies, quietly and efficiently. You will find the matter to your taste, I think." "G. Gregson has written more than usual," Holmes said, tapping the paper. "That in itself is cause for attention." I rose from my seat. "Then we are bound for Wiltshire?" He nodded. "Pack a small bag, Watson. We'll take the noon train to Swindon, then a carriage to Wilton Hall. If the maze is indeed as clever as described, we shall have need of fresh eyes and unclouded boots." "Boots?" Holmes smirked. "Mud, Watson. Gravel. Grass. In crimes of the garden variety, footwear is often the best witness. By midday, We were on the 12:05 from Paddington, rattling westward through a countryside still wrapped in the delicate green of new spring. Holmes said little, absorbed in the railway timetable and a small topographical sketch of Wilton Hall's grounds that he had somehow acquired in the hour between packing and departure dot as we neared our destination. I pressed him for further thoughts. What do you make of this maze, Holmes? Could someone have entered earlier and waited until dusk? Possible. But even then, how would they leave unseen, without footprints? Unless they scaled the hedges, which are reportedly trimmed too, neatly to allow climbing without damage, or tunneled underground like a badger. He looked up with a gleam of challenge. Watson, in a well-set maze, concealment is easy. But so is entrapment. If our killer chose that method, he risked being caught inside. Which means, whatever his method, he believed himself invisible or untouchable. The train slowed. Wilton Hall. The porter called. Holmes stood, pocketed his papers, and adjusted his coat. A man has been killed in the most confined space imaginable by someone who never left a trace. That, my dear Watson, is not merely a murder. No, it is an illusion. And all illusions, he added, eyes narrowing, can be reversed. Chapter 2. The arrival at Wilton Hall. The ride from Swindon to Wilton Hall took nearly an hour by hired carriage, traversing narrow country roads lined with elderflower and hawthorn. The skies had turned pale and lidless, giving the Wiltshire landscape a strange flatness, as though color itself had been thinned. Holmes, for his part, sat in composed silence, eyes half-lidded but clearly alert behind their feigned languor. I had long since ceased trying to guess whether his inactivity meant boredom or the distillation of thought as we rounded the final bend. Wilton Hall came into view, a grand Tudor residence of dark timber and sandstone, its chimneys clawing upward like fingers frozen in prayer. But it was not the house that first drew our attention. Beyond the north lawn sprawled the famed garden maze, a symmetrical sprawl of clipped hornbeam hedges nearly 10 feet high, encircled by a wrought-iron fence and patrolled, so it seemed, by silence itself. It reminds me of the Minotaur's dwelling in Crete, I murmured, leaning forward. Holmes gave a curt nod. Only here the monster was the one slaying. Or so we are meant to believe. Our carriage was met by a footman in mourning livery, who led us across the gravel drive and into the echoing vestibule of Wilton Hall. It was a house built on legacy dark oak panels, ancestral portraits whose painted eyes tracked one's movements, and staircases that seemed to ascend of their own accord. Waiting at the foot of the grand stair stood Inspector Tobias Gregson. His graying sideburns bristled, his coat flecked with travel dust. He offered Holmes a nod that barely masked his relief. "By heaven, I was beginning to think you'd not come," Gregson said. "I've half the Wiltshire constabulary chasing ghosts in that hedge." "Then let us hope we're hunting a ghost that leaves fingerprints," Holmes replied briskly. "The body? This way. But First Lady Montgomery insists on meeting you." Holmes's brows lifted a fraction. "Widow?" Gregson grunted. "Not exactly. Sister. Sir Giles never married. She's the last of the family line, save a niece. Somewhere in Switzerland." We were shown into the morning room, where Lady Frances Montgomery awaited us. A woman of perhaps 50, with high cheekbones and a severe elegance. She wore a morning gown of unadorned black silk, and carried herself with the brittle dignity of one who had long grown accustomed to disappointment. "Mr. Holmes," she said, rising only half an inch before returning to her seat. "I do not know whether you are a man of science or theater, but everyone tells me you are effective. That will have to suffice." "I am whatever the truth requires, Lady Montgomery," Holmes said gently. "And you believe this was murder?" "I believe it was not natural. Giles may have been a recluse, but he was not mad, nor suicidal. And he certainly did not fall on a knife in the center of his prize maze." She turned her gaze to me. "And this is your assistant?" "Dr. John Watson," I said. "At your service." She studied me a moment longer than necessary, then gave a slight nod, as though filing me under mostly harmless. Holmes leaned forward. "Tell me, had Sir Giles any enemies? Or shall we say, aggrieved associates?" She gave a thin smile. "He collected grievances the way others collect stamps. Former gardeners, museum board members, publishers, even an architect he sued over drainage issues. But as for an enemy capable of this, I cannot say. Did he live alone? Save for 3. Staff members Mr. Henry Clay, the groundskeeper, Miss Evangeline Pratt, his secretary, and cook, who never left the kitchen. Yes. I reside in the West Wing, but keep my distance." Holmes stood, offered a brief bow, and said, "Thank you. We shall now see what the garden has to say." The path to the maze ran behind the North Conservatory, bordered by lavender and yew. It was there, on the crushed gravel threshold, that Holmes paused. The hedge walls loomed ahead like green cliffs, the air oddly still within their embrace. A constable stood guard at the entrance, nodding as Gregson raised his hand. "Only 2 people have entered since the body was removed," Gregson said. "Myself and the doctor from town. We stepped precisely in Sir Giles' footprints." "And the body?" asked Holmes. "At the maze's heart, just where he liked to sit and read." Holmes crouched at the edge of the gravel, examining the path with the precision of a jeweler inspecting flaws in a diamond. "Extraordinary," he murmured. No sign of disturbance aside from the original print's deep heel depressions, slightly outward turn of the left foot. "Heavy man, I presume?" 18 stone, Gregson confirmed. "And he walked with a stick." "Indeed he did. See here slight punctures where the ferrule bit into the gravel, spaced rhythmically. Excellent." We entered the maze in single file, following the recorded path of Sir Giles. Every turn was deliberate, and the silence seemed to deepen with every step. Holmes made notes on a folded scrap of paper, occasionally muttering, "Curious," or "Noted." When we reached the central clearing, a circular plot of grass with a stone bench in its center, I felt an involuntary chill. A small chalk outline still marked the place where Sir Giles had fallen. Just beside a leather-bound copy of the Natural History of Wiltshire. Holmes walked in slow circles, eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring as though scenting something only he could detect. No drag marks, no signs of struggle. The wound? Single stab to the back, deep. Angle suggests the assailant stood behind him, slightly to the left. Yet no footprints, no broken twigs, no scuffing. He crouched near the bench, peered beneath it, and reached into his coat pocket for a glass lens. After a moment, he spoke. "Watson, note the crushed grass here, just behind the bench. 2. Faint for a boot, perhaps the corner of a knee or something pressing down from above." I blinked. Above? Holmes looked skyward. No tree branches overhead, but perhaps... He turned slowly. "What height are the hedges, Gregson?" 10 feet. 10 feet of foliage, with wooden trellis beneath, if I'm not mistaken. I shall want a ladder, and I shall want it now. Gregson stared. "You think the killer came over the maze?" Holmes did not answer. He had already begun walking the circumference of the clearing, his fingers trailing lightly along the inner walls of green. "What are you looking for?" I asked. Holmes glanced at me, his voice almost amused. "A hole, Watson. A hole in a place that was meant to be whole." Chapter 3. The first clues. A scene of deception. The gardener, a bony man with a sullen expression and an oilcloth cap pulled low over his brow, arrived with a ladder that had clearly seen more pruning than police work. Gregson grunted as it was hoisted into place beside the hedge near the maze's center. Holmes was already halfway up before I could protest. "Careful," I called. "Those rungs are hardly meant for such use." But Holmes paid me no heed. At the top, he leaned against the hedge wall, bracing one hand on the dense hornbeam. His free hand disappeared into the greenery, parting leaves with an almost surgical delicacy. After a moment, he spoke. "Interesting. Come up, Watson. Bring the lens." With some difficulty and less grace than Holmes, I joined him atop the ladder. He drew back slightly, allowing me to peer where he had parted the foliage. Nestled within the thick hedge, concealed to any casual glance, was a small rectangular panel of lattice, crudely sawed from behind and reattached with wire hooks. It had been pulled back into place, but Holmes's sharp eye had noticed the subtle change in leaf angle and the faint rust at the edges. "It would appear," he said softly, "that someone made a door." I blinked. "But to what end?" Hedge leads only to another corridor of the maze, doesn't it?" Holmes nodded. "Yes, but observe, there are no footprints leading from that direction into the clearing. If the killer approached through this passage and exited the same way, the absence of prints would be preserved, provided the inner panel concealed the route." He pressed lightly on the panel. It creaked open with effort, revealing a narrow tunnel carved through the hedge's interior, just wide enough for a slim man to squeeze through. "And the gravel?" I asked. "Surely they would have disturbed it eventually." "Not if they stayed within the greenery, like a beetle beneath." "Bark. Note the hedge base. There's a wooden support frame set into the soil. Our culprit walked atop it, never touching the path. Ingenious." Gregson, still below, stared upward. "Then the whole maze is compromised?" "Only this segment," Holmes replied. "The rest appears intact, which tells us our killer not only planned this in advance, but knew the maze intimately. Someone from the house, then, or someone who had access to the plans. In either case, this was no crime of passion. It was a performance." We returned to the clearing. Holmes crouched again near the bench where Sir Giles had been found. "The book," he said suddenly. "Has anyone examined it?" Gregson shrugged. "Local constable picked it up. Nothing inside but pressed flowers and a few margin notes." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, would you be so kind?" I retrieved the volume from a nearby evidence satchel. The Natural History of Wiltshire, its leather spine cracked, its edges curled with age and exposure. As I opened it, a few petals crumbled from between the pages. Pressed foxglove, yarrow, and what appeared to be belladonna. Holmes' expression sharpened. "Belladonna? Curious choice for a gardener. And deliberate." "Poisonous," I murmured. "And not native to this estate's grounds, if I recall." Holmes nodded. "Indeed not. Its presence in this volume may have been symbolic, or perhaps a warning." I turned the pages more carefully. On the inside back cover, in Sir Giles's angular hand, was a curious scrawl, half a sentence, unfinished. "E. saw me take the..." and then nothing. I showed it to Holmes. "E?" "I asked. Miss Evangeline Pratt, the secretary," he murmured. "Or possibly someone else entirely. But certainly a person of interest." Gregson frowned. "We interviewed her. Says she was in the village that afternoon, posting correspondence. No one can verify it yet." Holmes looked thoughtful. "Then we shall verify it ourselves." He turned once more to the maze's clearing, scanning the hedge walls with eyes that saw more than mine ever could. "There is still a question unanswered," he said softly. I waited. "The knife. No one has found it, which means it was taken or hidden. But where, in a place so thoroughly searched?" He moved to the stone bench and rapped its base with his cane. Hollow. After a moment's effort, he pried loose one of the support stones. Beneath it, wrapped in a faded gardening cloth, was a narrow, leaf-shaped blade. Dried blood still clung to the handle. Gregson's face darkened. "So it was left behind." Holmes nodded. And planted deliberately in a place where only someone of a very specific kind of curiosity, would think to look. He turned the blade in his hands. No fingerprints, of course. And the cloth monogrammed. He held it out. Stitched into one corner, in faded red thread, were the initials H. Henry Clay. I said, "The groundskeeper?" Holmes gave a brief, unreadable smile. "Indeed, but let us not leap. A monogram can be planted as easily as a knife. We must speak to Mr. Clay and Miss Pratt. Both have roles in this play, though whether as players or pawns remains to be seen." Gregson frowned. But why plant the knife here? Why not dispose of it entirely? Holmes looked toward the hedge path again. "Because, Inspector, the killer wanted it found, but not too quickly. A delayed discovery, framed to mislead. The real deception here is not the murder itself." He turned toward us. "It is the timing." And with that enigmatic remark, he strode from the clearing, coat flaring behind him like a signal flag in retreat. Chapter 4. The gathering of suspects. By the time we returned to the manor, the Wiltshire sun had dimmed behind a veil of pale cloud. The mood inside Wilton Hall was subdued, hushed as if the house itself understood that it now belonged to the dead. Holmes requested a gathering of the household, those who had been present on the evening of Sir Giles Montgomery's death. Lady Frances, despite her steely disposition, agreed without resistance. "Best to air the shadows," she remarked dryly, "before they become mildew." The drawing-room was chosen for its size, and soon the figures assembled. I watched them with the trained eye of a medical man, but it was Holmes who read them like a ledger of shifting debts. First came Mr. Henry Clay, the estate's groundskeeper for over a decade. A man in his late 50s, thickly built and weathered. Like old wood, he wore a gardener's coat patched at both elbows. His brow was lined with suspicion, and his eyes, gray and small, darted toward Holmes with something like resentment. Then Miss Evangeline Pratt, Sir Giles' private secretary, entered with hesitant steps. She was younger than I expected, no more than 30, and possessed the kind of careful beauty cultivated by restraint. Her hair was pinned with severe precision, her blouse buttoned high. Yet her eyes betrayed her nerves, flickering, uncertain. Holding something back, the final attendee was Cook, a stout woman with red cheeks and flour on her sleeves. She did not sit, but lingered awkwardly near the door, hands clasped as if holding an invisible ladle. Lady Frances took the armchair near the hearth, cold and upright as a statue, and observed the others with impassive detachment. "This is everyone," she said. "No guests that night, no visitors." Holmes remained standing. Gregson hovered by the window, notebook in hand, though I suspected he would write little. Holmes cleared his throat. "Sir Giles died under what may be the most peculiar circumstances I have ever encountered. But I find that even the most inexplicable crime, when disrobed of theatrics, reduces itself to human motive." He turned to Clay first. "Mr. Clay, how well did you know the design of the maze?" Clay scowled. "I built it, sir. Dug every trench, planted every hedge, laid every gravel path." "Interesting. And did you ever construct any hidden passages? Anything not noted in the official plans?" "No, sir." Holmes arched a brow. "You are certain?" "Quite. Sir Giles would have flayed me alive if I so much as trimmed a hedge wrong. Yet someone did just that, cut a concealed passage through the wall." Clay's mouth tightened. "Then it wasn't me. I'd never damage what I built." Holmes let the words hang before stepping toward Miss Pratt. "You were in the village that afternoon?" She nodded quickly. "Yes, I had letters to post on. Sir Giles' behalf. He dictated them that morning." "May I see them?" I believe the inspector took them." She glanced nervously at Gregson, who gave a grunt and began flipping through his folio. "Here, he said at last, handing over a bundle tied with string. Holmes examined the envelopes. All were addressed in the same looping script. He held them to the light, checking postmarks, ink freshness, and pressure. "Tell me, Miss Pratt," he asked softly, "why did you post them so late in the day?" Her voice wavered. I stayed to type up one last letter. Sir Giles dictated it after luncheon. I didn't want to make 2 trips. Holmes held up one of the envelopes. "This letter is dated the day before." She paled slightly. He often backdated them. Holmes said nothing, merely turned to Lady Frances. Was it Sir Giles' habit to spend his evenings alone in the maze? She nodded. Almost ritual. After supper, he'd take a book, usually botany, and sit at the center until dusk. Did he often meet with anyone there? Never. He detested interruption. Holmes paced slowly before the group, the way a schoolmaster might before announcing an exam. One final question. Had Sir Giles argued with anyone in the days prior to his death? A silence. Then Miss Pratt, reluctantly. He dismissed someone. Mr. Orson Hale, his apprentice. A young man Sir Giles had been mentoring. There was an incident. An incident? He accused Mr. Holloway of stealing rare bulbs from the greenhouse. There was shouting. Sir Giles was very harsh. Mr. Holloway left the next morning. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And where is this Mr. Holloway now?" Lady Frances answered. "No one knows. He sent no word. Vanished entirely. But I doubt he had the spine for murder." Gregson made a note. "We'll send a wire. See if he's returned to London or abroad." Holmes folded his arms. "Very good. Now, Mr. Clay, where were you between 6 and 8 the night of Sir Giles's death?" "In the potting shed," Clay said flatly, "fixing a cracked cistern." "Alone?" "Yes. And you, Miss Pratt?" "In my quarters. I had a headache." "After returning from the village. No one saw you?" "No." "And cook?" "I was making bread," she replied. "Rising times long. No need to linger about dead hedges, if you ask me." Holmes gave a slight bow of thanks and motioned for the gathering to end as the others left. Holmes turned to me. "Well, Watson?" "A house full of weak alibis and subtle tension," I replied. "Miss Pratt fears something. Mr. Clay resents something. And the missing apprentice adds a convenient shadow." Holmes smiled faintly. "Not bad, old friend. But there's more." He stepped to the drawing-room window and looked out toward the maze, now cast in gray. This crime was orchestrated. Every element planned. That means knowledge, patience, and purpose. He tapped his fingers against the sill. We now know how the killer arrived and escaped undetected, but not why Sir Giles had to die in the maze. He turned to me. Until we understand why, we will never know who. Chapter 5. First Suspects. The red herring the following morning broke with a sluggish drizzle that gave Wilton Hall's stonework the sheen of cold iron. The maze, already a foreboding presence, now loomed like a soaked sentinel upon the landscape. Inside the drawing-room, Holmes paced barefoot, shirt-sleeved, deep in thought while I sat beside the fireplace, rereading my notes from the previous day. It was a rare sight, seeing Holmes in such physical stillness and mental motion, his long fingers occasionally weaving invisible patterns through the air. "There is something," he muttered, "that continues to trouble me." "Only one thing?" I asked mildly. He gave a brief smile, then turned toward the table, where the recovered knife lay in an evidence satchel beside the blood-stained gardening cloth. He removed the cloth again, running his fingers across the monogrammed corner. H. Sigh. "Is too convenient, Watson. Too obvious." "You believe it was planted to implicate Mr. Clay?" "I believe it was meant to be found," Holmes replied. "The real question is, why implicate Clay, and why wait to do so? Had the killer wanted a swift arrest, They could have left the knife in his tool shed. Perhaps they feared too quick an arrest would raise Holmesian suspicion. Holmes chuckled softly. Indeed, and yet Scotland Yard has taken the bait. We were interrupted by a knock on the door. Inspector Gregson entered with the expression of a man who believed he had earned his morning tea, and then some. "Well, I've had a wire from Devizes," he said, patting his coat pocket. "Turns out Mr. Clay was involved in a property dispute with Sir Giles last year, something about cottage land being reassigned to the estate." "Ah," Holmes said, settling into a chair. "Do go on." Clay had lived in a small house on the western edge of the estate. Sir Giles wanted to reclaim the land and ordered Clay to move into the groundskeeper's quarters, damp, windowless, and half the size. Clay refused. There was shouting. It nearly went to court. Only Lady Frances intervened to prevent scandal. "And what of the letters Miss Pratt posted?" Gregson tapped his folio. "All genuine. All dated the morning of Sir Giles's death. But none bear village stamps. Not posted? Correct. Found them in the village drop-box just after midnight. Too late to be cleared. Either she lied about when she went to the village, or someone else posted them." Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "A secretary whose whereabouts are unverified. A groundskeeper with a motive. And a knife that cries out for attention." He glanced toward the window. "A case offers all the signs of resolution, and yet the melody is off. There is something discordant in the arrangement." Gregson huffed. "We've enough to bring Clay in, if you ask me. The cloth, the feud, and knowledge of the maze." "Precisely why I hesitate," Holmes murmured. "Everything aligns too neatly. Like a canvas where someone's painted over the real scene." Gregson grunted, clearly unconvinced. "Well, I'll be in the constable's office, if you need me." When he was gone, Holmes rose and began to gather his coat. "Where are we going?" I asked, rising in turn. "To the potting shed. Let us follow the scent of this red herring to its source." The grounds behind Wilton Hall were wide and overgrown, with ivy-crawled stone walls and a weathered sundial now permanently fixed at noon. The potting shed stood at the far corner of the garden's leaning, moss-covered and smelling faintly of compost and tobacco. Holmes knocked once, then entered without waiting. Clay looked up from a bench where he was sharpening shears. "Come. To arrest me, have you?" he asked without humor. "Not unless you insist," Holmes said calmly. "Tell me, Mr. Clay, did you ever lend your tools to Sir Giles?" Clay snorted. "The man barely spoke to me unless something was dying. And even then he preferred to. Blame the soil." Holmes examined the cluttered shelves, fingering rows of labeled seed packets and rusting trowels. "This cloth." He withdrew the monogrammed square from his pocket. "Is it yours?" Clay's eyes darkened. "It was. Went missing a week ago. I figured it got tossed out with the trimmings. Any idea who might have taken it?" He hesitated. "No." "Come now, Mr. Clay. You knew the man was difficult, even cruel. Did you ever threaten him?" Clay rose to his full height. "I may've cursed him under my breath, but no, I never threatened him. I've worked this land too long to stain it with blood." Holmes stared at him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "I believe you," he said finally. That startled Clay more than any accusation. "Why?" he asked. Holmes smiled faintly. "Because the man who built the maze would never violate it. As we stepped outside, I caught up beside him." "You believe he's innocent?" "I believe he was meant to look guilty," Holmes said. "And now I intend to speak with someone who, so far, has spoken very little." "Miss Pratt?" "No, Lady Frances." He paused on the path, watching the mist settle in the folds of the maze beyond. "You see, Watson," he murmured, "there is something quietly wrong about this house. As if everyone is performing a play, but none of them know the ending." Chapter 6. The Secret Clue. A hidden inconsistency. Lady Frances received us in the small library, a narrow room lined with dusty tomes and the scent of lavender oil and old parchment. She sat near the window, immobile in a high-backed chair, as if carved from the same oak that surrounded her. A silver tea service rested untouched on a nearby tray. Holmes offered no preamble. Lady Frances, your brother's maze was designed to be perfect. But someone made a door, a breach that only someone with foreknowledge and precision could have constructed. She did not flinch. Then you suspect someone in this house? I suspect someone who either lives here or lived here long enough to understand how to disappear inside it. She regarded Holmes coolly. You came here for answers, Mr. Holmes, not to dress suspicion in riddles. I came, Holmes replied, because your brother was murdered in a way that defies ordinary motive. And yet, all great deceptions leave behind a thread some small inconsistency, a seam in the mask. He glanced about the room. Did Sir Giles frequent this library? Rarely, she said. He preferred solitude in the conservatory or the maze. And did he maintain any journals or private writings, anything beyond letters and botany charts? She hesitated. There were notebooks, mostly mundane plant inventories, climate notes. May I see them? They're in the east wing in his study. You're welcome to them. Holmes gave a brief bow. Then I shall trouble you for the key. Sir Giles's study lay on the second floor, narrow, high-ceilinged, and cloaked in a thin layer of dust. Though clearly untouched since his death, the room bore the unmistakable impression of a man who had once lived inside order. Not a book out of place, not a scroll misaligned. And yet beneath the surface a coldness lingered, as if the order was maintained not for comfort, but control. Holmes made a slow circle around the room, pausing near a cabinet beside the window. This lock, he said quietly, has been forced recently. He retrieved a magnifying lens from his coat and peered closely. Scratches around the keyhole. The wood has splintered along the edge, not visible from afar, deliberate. Inside were 3 field journals, bound in leather and numbered in sequence. Holmes opened the first and flipped through quickly. Observations on moss growth, notes on pruning techniques. Here, a sketch of the maze's central clearing. He turned to the second journal. Horticultural entries. Mentions of clay, mentions of Miss Pratt, a passing note, E. still watches me. Too closely. Must speak with Francis. Then, abruptly, he paused. Watson, look at this. I stepped forward. The third journal, unlike the others, was missing pages, dozens of them torn from the middle section, the edges ragged and frayed. Removed in haste, I observed. Not by Sir Giles. Unlikely, Holmes murmured. He was a fastidious man. If he had wanted to redact something, he'd have burned the book. He sniffed the inner spine. Still smells faintly of smoke. Someone tried to char these pages after tearing them. There are ash particles in the binding. Inexpert. But why steal from a plant log? Holmes was already back at the desk, checking the drawers. In the third one, he found a folded sheet tucked between blotter pads. It was a letter UNC-NT.Francis. I am not well. The feeling has returned that I am being observed even in solitude. At times, the birds cease their song as I approach. The very leaves seem to hush. This is not madness. I know the weight of guilt and the tricks of grief, but this is something other. The past is moving again, and I fear it is not done with us. Holmes, read it aloud, his voice low. The past is moving again. Curious phrasing, almost poetic. He handed the letter to me and continued his inspection. Near the edge of the bookshelf, his eyes lit on something. Watson, the frame. He pointed to a modest portrait of Sir Giles, hung with casual symmetry among several botanical diagrams. At first glance, it appeared untouched. But as Holmes slid it from the wall, he revealed a narrow alcove behind it, a small cavity. Bored into the wood panel dot inside was a folded scrap of maize parchment. Holmes unfolded it slowly. Ah, here's our ghost. The diagram was identical to the maze layout provided to the landscapers 3 years earlier, except for one critical difference. A pencil-drawn tunnel, invisible to the naked eye, unless closely studied, connected. 2 outer corridors to the center clearing via an internal crawl space. A margin note read, "Cut only once hedge reaches full density, otherwise detectable." A hidden channel, I whispered. Built into the original plan? Yes, but never documented in the final prints. It was meant to remain secret. Sir Giles trusted someone enough to give them this copy, or left it for himself. Do you suppose he feared someone using it against him? Holmes tapped the margin. Or perhaps he feared himself using it against someone else. We stood in silence for a moment, the implications widening with each breath. Now, Holmes said softly, we must speak to Miss Pratt again. Why her? He turned, eyes sharp. Because she's the only one who saw Sir Giles regularly enough to remove pages unnoticed, to post letters at irregular times, and to know what he feared. He reached for his coat, and because in every performance, Watson, there is always one who knows the script too well. Chapter 7. The crime grows stranger. We found Miss Evangeline Pratt in the West Conservatory, hunched over a ledger, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she attempted to reconcile a column of figures. The glass panels above filtered in a cold, gray light, casting a pallor across her face that made her appear even more drawn than the day before. Holmes did not announce himself. He simply stepped inside, closed the door with a soft click, and said, "You removed the pages from Sir Giles's journal." She froze only for a second, but to Holmes, such moments were paragraphs. "No," she said flatly, keeping her gaze on the page. "Then you posted letters with incorrect dates, fabricated your alibi, and failed to mention Mr. Hale's return to the grounds the night Sir Giles died." Her hand slipped, and the pen left a sharp black gash across the ledger. Her voice wavered. "I didn't lie. He dictated those letters late. He was always changing his mind. I stayed in the village longer than I should have. Yes, but I returned before nightfall. You said no one saw you." "Because no one did." Holmes took a step forward. "Miss Pratt, what did you do with the missing pages?" She stood abruptly, eyes flashing. "Nothing. I don't have them." "But you read them," Holmes replied gently. "Or part of them, at least. And they frightened you." She pressed her lips together. He was not ... well. He had become paranoid. "He told me someone was entering the maze at night. That someone was watching him from the hedges. He said he heard footsteps behind him, even when he was alone." I interjected, "Did you believe him?" She paused. "At first, no. I thought it was grief. His mind had become brittle since the loss of the museum position. But then?" Holmes asked. She looked down at her gloved hands. "Then I saw. The drawing, the secret passage. It wasn't paranoia. He was right. You confronted him?" "I tried. He refused to speak of it. He dismissed me from the room, said I was too delicate to understand the darker corners of the garden he had created." Holmes paced slowly, eyes scanning the conservatory, as if reading the plants for confession. "Why didn't you tell? The police this earlier?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Because I was afraid. Because I knew they'd think it was me. He was all I had. He took me in when I had nowhere else to go. I owe him everything." Holmes turned toward her. "Then, help us. Did he ever mention the name Orson Hawley to you after the dismissal?" She nodded. "Yes, once, late one evening. He said, I thought I'd rid the garden of poison, but it's still growing." Then he tore up the letter he was writing and locked himself in his study. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Do you know where Mr. Halley might have gone?" She hesitated. He had a sister, Lydia, lives in Marlborough. I heard him mention it once. He might have gone there." Holmes gave a nod. "Thank you, Miss Pratt. That will be all for now." As we exited the conservatory, the drizzle had thickened into a steady rain. Holmes stood at the edge of the veranda, watching the maze darken beneath the downpour. "She's holding something back," he said. "She admitted quite a lot," I countered. "Yes, but nothing new. Every revelation was a confirmation of what we already suspected." "You think she's protecting someone?" "I think," Holmes said, "that she's trapped by loyalty, by fear, or by a memory she doesn't yet dare examine." Back inside, we found Gregson in the entry hall, soaked from the shoulders down. "You'll want to hear this," he said, shaking off his coat. "A stable boy from the neighboring farm just came by. Said he saw a man matching Hale's description near the outer hedge of Wilton Hall the morning after the murder." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Morning?" "Yes, early. Said he was trying to flag down the postal cart, then ducked into the woods when the boy got too close. So Halley returned after the murder." "Why?" "No idea," Gregson said. "But we've sent word to Marlborough. The local constable's searching Lydia Hale's cottage." Holmes was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Watson, fetch your coat. We're going back into the maze." I blinked. "In this weather?" "Especially in this weather. Rain reveals what dust conceals." Back within the winding hedges, everything was changed. The gravel paths were soaked and misshapen, and the air was thick with the scent of damp leaves and earth. The center clearing, now muddy and bare, felt oddly exposed without the presence of the body. Holmes walked slowly, scanning the base of the hedge nearest to the concealed panel. He crouched. "Watson, here, look." I joined him and saw a faint indentation in the muddy soil just beneath the lattice, barely visible, half erased by the rain. "Footprint?" "Yes. Not from the night of the murder. This one is fresher. Larger boot. Different heel pattern." "Then someone returned," I said. "Perhaps to move the weapon before we found it?" Holmes shook his head. "No, this was not a retrieval. This was a placement." He stood, brushing the mud from his gloves. "Halley returned after the murder. That's why the knife was left beneath the bench. He planted it. But someone else committed the crime. And why cover for the real killer?" Holmes's face darkened. "Because guilt has many shapes, and not all of them come with blood." We turned toward the exit path, rain slicking our shoulders. Holmes's pace was quicker. Now his eyes focused, his posture tightening with purpose. "This case, Watson," he said quietly, "is no longer just about who entered the maze." He paused. "It's about why someone wanted the center to remain empty." Chapter 8. Holmes tests a theory that evening. The rain gave way to a strange, dense stillness clouds, like smeared charcoal. The air thick as wool. The maze glistened. Under a sheen of mist, its paths dark and soaked, its hedges breathing faint vapors in the cooling dusk. Holmes stood once again at the threshold of Wilton Hall's northern lawn, his hands behind his back, eyes trained on the maze as if waiting for it to speak. "I've always believed, Watson," he said at length, "that to solve a puzzle, one must not only study its edges, but also place oneself at its center to become, for a moment, the very shape of the crime." "You mean to revisit the scene as if you were the killer?" "Precisely. To retrace every decision, not just logically, but psychologically." I knew that tone well. Holmes was about to stage one of his subtle and dangerous experiments. Already, he had borrowed a coat from the late Sir Giles's wardrobe one, with the faint scent of lavender, and tobacco clinging to the collar, and now wore it loosely over his own dot as we crossed toward the maze. I noticed something else. Holmes had asked Lady Frances and Miss Pratt to join us. Both women now stood on the Manor's veranda, wrapped in shawls and guarded expressions. Gregson remained inside, unaware of Holmes's unfolding theater. "What are you planning?" I whispered as we approached the maze. "A test, but not of the maze, Watson, of the Watchers." Inside the maze, the atmosphere had changed. The rain had left puddles in the gravel and dislodged small clumps of moss from the hedge base. Holmes moved slowly through the familiar twists and bends, humming softly to himself. I followed a few paces behind. "Note the way the gravel reacts," he said. "Soft, but recoverable. A man could tread carefully and leave little behind if he knew the rhythm of the turns." As we reached the clearing, Holmes walked to the bench and sat, positioning himself exactly where Sir Giles had been found. He opened the same botanical journal we had recovered, now dry from the hearth. For several minutes he sat still, completely still, like a painting in repose. Then, without warning, he turned his head toward the hedge wall opposite the secret passage and whispered, "Did you hear that?" I froze. "Footsteps," he said. "Shuffling ones, light, female." "There's no one here but us." Holmes stood. "Not here, there." He crossed toward the far corner of the hedge wall, just opposite the original break. There was no panel, no opening, but he crouched and ran his hand across the lower foliage. Then he reached into the pocket of the borrowed coat and withdrew a white handkerchief. He laid it on the hedge base, stood back, and called out loud enough for it to carry through the corridors. "Ah, Giles! So that's where you kept it." The clearing held its breath. No reply got Holmes turned to me, voice low. "And now, Watson, we wait." We returned to the Manor without incident, but Holmes's mood had grown quieter, his eyes distant, his step quick. In the drawing room he removed Sir Giles's coat and sat before the fire. "She was there," he murmured. "Who?" "Someone was watching, just beyond the hedge. She moved when I moved, stopped when I stopped. But she didn't follow. She retreated." I stared at him. "Are you suggesting that someone returns to the maze each evening? Or they used to, out of habit, out of obsession, but not now?" "Not since the center was stained." Holmes stood. Abruptly, "Fetch Miss Pratt." I returned a few minutes later with her. She was pale, lips tight, shawl clutched around her like a barrier. Holmes gestured for her to sit. "Miss Pratt," he said softly, "you visited the maze frequently, didn't you? Even when Sir Giles wasn't aware of it." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I believe you used the second entrance, the one through the gardener's passage, to watch him, to listen. Perhaps to protect him, or perhaps to catch him in a lie." She stiffened. "That's not true." "But you feared what he was hiding. You found the alternate diagram long before we did. Perhaps you even believed he had used that passage once himself to follow someone." Her voice rose. "Why would I do any of that?" "Because," Holmes said gently, "you loved him. Not romantically, no, but with the furious, quiet loyalty of someone who needed him to be right about the world, to make sense of it. When he began to slip, when the paranoia took root, you tried to tether him. But the rope frayed." Tears sprang to her eyes, though. She blinked them away. "I didn't kill him." "No," Holmes said, rising, "but I suspect you know who did. Or rather, who caused it." A long silence followed. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind stirred the hedges again. Finally, Miss Pratt whispered, "He was afraid of Orson. But it wasn't just the theft. It was something else. Something about the maze's original purpose." Holmes's brow lifted. "Go on." She hesitated. "Giles once said it was designed to trap memory, not people. That if you followed the right pattern to the center, It would force you to confront what you'd buried. Holmes exhaled slowly. An architectural confession. How very Giles. Miss Pratt nodded, wiping her face. He told me he saw someone at the center one night. Someone he thought had died years ago. And did you believe him? Her voice cracked. I do now. Holmes turned away, lost in thought. So, I said softly, what now? He faced the fire. Now, he said, we find Orson Hawley, not to ask why he disappeared, but what he left behind. Chapter 9. A second attempt. The culprit strikes again. The storm returned in the night. A violent thunderclap woke me near. Midnight, followed by a flurry of wind, had rattled the leaded windows of Wilton Hall like bones in a box. I lit the lamp beside my bed and stepped out into the corridor. The long passage was dark, save for a single glow ahead. Holmes's door stood ajar, and candlelight flickered inside. He was already dressed, peering out the window with that particular stillness of mind I had come to recognize. Outside, this maze writhed in the storm like a wounded serpent. Rain lashed the hedges. Lightning struck beyond the distant orchard. Watson, he said, without turning, something is about to happen. I joined him at the window. You felt it too? He nodded. The air is wrong, electric, and someone is restless. Fear doesn't always flee. Sometimes it circles back. There came a hurried knock at the bedroom door. It was Gregson. Dripping wet in a nightshirt and coat. Holmes, he barked. There's been an incident. Holmes was already moving. Where? The West Wing. Miss Pratt's room. She's missing. We arrived moments later to find Lady Frances standing in the hallway, her expression thunderous. A maid hovered behind her, white-faced, clutching a candle. The door to Miss Pratt's room stood wide open. Inside, the bed was untouched. The window had been thrown open to the rain. No one saw her leave, Lady Frances said, voice tight. Her boots are gone. And her coat. Footprints? Holmes asked. Gregson gestured toward the rear stairs, leading to the back garden. They vanished near the orchard path. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Not the maze? No, away from it. He said nothing for a moment, then turned on his heel. Come, Watson. As we passed through the kitchen door to the rear gardens, I caught sight of a lantern bobbing through the mist ahead. Holmes sprinted toward it, coat flaring like a black sail. I followed close behind. We caught up to the light near the old greenhouse, an overgrown structure whose glass roof had collapsed years ago, now half swallowed by vines and nettles. The lantern swung wildly in the wind, casting wild shadows. Near its base, lying half buried in damp soil, was Miss Pratt's shawl, torn and muddy. Where is she? I asked. Holmes didn't answer. He was crouching, examining the earth. There's a second set of prints, he said. Boots, larger than hers. They approached from the side path and returned the same way. She was taken? No. His eyes narrowed. She followed someone, willingly, but it didn't end well. Just then, a shout rang out from the trees, one of the local constables. Here, in the orchard. We ran to the voice and found her beneath an apple tree, seated against the trunk, conscious but dazed. Her right arm was bloodied, a gash along the forearm. One boot was missing. Holmes knelt beside her. Miss Pratt, who did this? She looked up slowly, pupils wide, shivering violently. I followed the figure. I saw them from my window. Same coat, same shape. As she hesitated. As Giles. I thought I was dreaming. She touched her arm. He turned on me. Did you see his face? No. Masked, but tall, young. It wasn't Clay, and it wasn't Giles. Holmes offered her his scarf, tying it around the wound. Did he say anything? She nodded. He whispered, You shouldn't have come." Then he fled. Gregson arrived seconds later with another constable and helped escort her back toward the manor. Holmes stood silently, watching them go. She was meant to die tonight, he said quietly. To silence her? To scare her? To provoke chaos? To delay us? I frowned. And yet he failed. No, Holmes said, straightening. He succeeded, because now we're watching the wrong path. What do you mean? He pointed toward the orchard. That attack was a diversion. The real move was made elsewhere. I stared at him. The maze? He was already running that. We reached the maze's southern entrance, the lesser-used side where only Clay had access. Owing to the gate's rusted bolt and crumbling fencing dot, it had been forced open. Inside, the gravel bore signs of a single set, of recent trax-pail indentations where water hadn't yet pooled. Holmes advanced without hesitation, his steps careful but quick. I followed with a lantern, its glow chasing shadows back into the hedge dot at the center clearing. All appeared unchanged dot, but Holmes moved directly to the bench. He reached behind it. Then he froze. It's gone, he said flatly. What? The cloth, the knife, the entire satchel. I stared at the space we had so carefully marked and guarded. The killer returned. During the chaos, they knew where we kept the evidence. Holmes straightened, face grim. They watched me plant the handkerchief. They saw my experiment. They heard Miss Pratt's confession. And they decided it was time to erase the trail. I whispered. Then they were here tonight, ... watching us again. Holmes's jaw tightened. Yes, and now the trap is nearly closed. He turned, his eyes burning with sudden clarity. We have only one night left to spring it. Chapter 10. The true motive begins to surface. Morning broke over Wilton Hall with deceptive calm. The storm had passed, leaving the estate glazed in dew and silence. Yet beneath that stillness ran an undercurrent of tension, like a taut string waiting to snap. Holmes had slept little. I found him already at the breakfast table, black coffee in hand, his plate untouched. Laid out before him were 3 items: the maze diagram with the hidden passage, the torn botanical journal, and a letter the one Sir Giles had begun, but never sent to his sister. He did not look up when I entered. "Watson," he said, "we've been asking the wrong question." I sat across from him. Not who, but why. He finally met my eyes. Yes, the method is clever, but not perfect. The culprit is resourceful, but not flawless. The misdirections are well placed, but too symmetrical, too eager to be found. That kind of control comes from desperation. He tapped the letter. This wasn't a crime of hatred. It was a crime of unmaking, of erasing something dangerous. I leaned forward. You think Sir Giles was about to expose something? That he was silenced before he could speak? Holmes nodded. And not merely silenced. He was staged. Before I could reply, the door burst open. Gregson strode in, clutching a telegram. We found Orson Hawley. Holmes stood instantly. Alive? Yes, staying under a false name in Marlborough with his sister Lydia. The constables brought him in an hour ago. He's being held in the town jail. Says he was here the night of the murder, but denies everything. Did he give a reason for returning after the fact? Gregson scowled. Claims he was retrieving a journal he left behind. Says it had nothing to do with the maze? Holmes's lips thinned. Then we must speak with him directly. Watson, you're with me. The Marlborough jail was a square, stony building with bars rusted by rain and silence. Inside, in a small holding cell, sat Orson Hawley. He was younger than I had expected, barely 30, with a gaunt, scholarly look, spectacles bent slightly at the bridge. He had the bearing of someone who had lived most of his life being spoken over. Holmes stepped to the bars. Mr. Hall. Orson glanced. Up, you're Holmes. I am, and you're the man who returned to the scene of a murder you claim not to have committed. Orson's jaw clenched. I didn't kill him. But I'm not surprised he's dead. Holmes raised an eyebrow. No, most people are. Orson leaned forward. Giles was brilliant, but he was cruel. He had a mind like a scalpel, and no regard for what he cut. Elaborate. I studied under him for nearly 2 years. He was designing the maze when I arrived. Obsessed with balance, perfection. But it wasn't just a garden to him. It was a symbol. He said the maze represented the mind, that the center should be a place of reckoning, that if someone reached it, they should be forced to face their worst truth. Rather philosophical for a horticulturist, Orson gave a bitter laugh. He wasn't a gardener. He was an architect of control. That maze wasn't for visitors. It was for him, a place to confront whatever haunted him. Holmes folded his arms. Did he ever use the hidden passage in your presence? Yes, Orson said, surprising us both. Once, he said he needed to see the maze from the inside out. He entered through the tunnel and watched me walk it from above, through the edge lattice. Said it helped him reverse the pattern. Watson frowned. Reverse the pattern? He believed, Orson said, that guilt had a geometry, that if you could walk it backward, it would dissolve. Holmes's eyes glittered. You said he was cruel. What did he do to you? Orson's face hardened. He accused me of theft. Rare bulbs. I didn't take them. But he humiliated me in front of Lady Frances. Accused me of spying, of undermining his work. He made me burn my own research before I left. Holmes's voice was quiet. Did you return the night of the murder? Orson nodded slowly. Yes, I knew where he kept the journal he stole from me, behind the third panel in his study. I waited until the lights were out. Took it and left. Why didn't you speak? Up after his death? Because I knew how it would look. And because I was afraid. Holmes studied him. You didn't go into the maze that night? No, Orson said firmly. I never went near it again. Holmes turned to go, but Orson added, But you're looking in the wrong place. Giles wasn't killed for something he did recently. Holmes paused. He was killed, Orson said, for something he buried. On the ride back to Wilton Hall, Holmes sat in silence, fingertips pressed together, eyes closed. The carriage rocked over uneven cobblestones, but his concentration did not waver. Finally, he spoke. It's nearly complete. What is? The picture, he said. Sir Giles built the maze to contain guilt, but whose? I said nothing. Holmes turned to me. Miss Pratt saw someone in the maze who resembled Sir Giles, but not exactly. Same coat, same posture. It was meant to confuse her. You think the killer wore Giles's coat? Yes, and they watched the center for weeks, waiting for the right moment. This was a performance, Watson, staged for multiple audiences. And the final act, Holmes's eyes narrowed, begins tonight. Back at the hall, the house was buzzing with the news of Orson Hale's arrest. Lady Frances was in the drawing room, her expression unreadable. Miss Pratt remained in her quarters, resting under medical watch. Clay had withdrawn to the greenhouse. Holmes summoned Gregson and issued a quiet request. I want the maze sealed. Every path watched. No one enters without my permission. And above all, no one leaves. Gregson raised a brow. Expecting company? Holmes glanced toward the window, where the maze shimmered faintly in the midday sun. I expect, he said, that whoever truly killed Sir Giles will soon realize the walls are closing. He tapped the hidden diagram once more. And when they return to the center this time, they won't be walking out. Chapter 11. The Bait. Holmes' grand strategy that evening. Holmes became a shadow of the man I had known for years, not in spirit, but in purpose. He moved silently through Wilton Hall, making brief appearances in each corner of the estate, speaking with Gregson in hushed tones, inspecting the garden shed once more, and standing alone by the broken sundial near the orchard, as if measuring the day's final breath. When I finally confronted him near the study, he was sealing a small envelope. "You're preparing something," I said. "Not preparing," he replied, concluding. "The net has been cast, Watson. All that remains is the final lure." He handed me the envelope. It was unmarked. "Deliver this to Lady Frances," he said. "Do not read it. Wait exactly 45 minutes after giving it to her. Then meet me at the maze." I nodded and moved to obey, though my curiosity burned. Lady Frances received the envelope without question. She sat at her writing desk, her posture iron straight, the room dimmed but not dark. As I handed her the note, her fingers hesitated on the seal, then she opened it with a soft rip. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "Is this your doing, Dr. Watson? Or his? I don't know what's inside," I said truthfully. She nodded, more to herself than to me. "Then I suppose I shall find out." 45 minutes later, I approached the maze. The moon was half shuttered behind clouds, casting a shifting silver over the estate. Gregson and 2 constables lingered at the perimeter, as instructed. No one was to follow Holmes. No one was to speak. Just watch. The constables, sharp-eyed and solemn, stood beside the southern entrance. Holmes had slipped in through the north. I waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then, at last, the hedge stirred. Holmes emerged from the northern mouth, his coat slightly damp, a small smile playing at his lips. He gestured for me to follow. Inside the maze, we moved briskly. The gravel, still soft from the previous night's storm, bore a fresh trail not Holmes's. Smaller boots. Lighter step. "She came," he said. "Lady Frances?" Holmes didn't reply. We arrived at the center. The clearing looked unchanged until Holmes stepped to the bench and reached beneath. He withdrew something wrapped in dark cloth. "I placed the knife here again," he said. "Not the original and identical blade, wiped clean. A decoy. But she didn't know that. And he unfolded the cloth. Inside, pressed against the hilt, was a tiny scrap of lace. Holmes held it up to the moonlight. A cuff, torn on the hedge lattice as she fled. Then it was her? I asked. "Lady Frances?" He shook his head. "No, but she led them here. She passed the letter on, just as I hoped." I blinked. "So the letter wasn't meant for her?" Holmes's smile faded. "It was meant for the one who feared she would read it." He turned, tracing the hedge wall with gloved fingers. "Frances is many things, but she is not the killer. She has spent her life managing shadows, not casting them." "Then who?" We both turned at once as footsteps approached. From the opposite entrance, a figure stepped into the clearing. It was Miss Pratt, but not the same woman we had spoken to in trembles and half-whispers. Her face was calm now, her movements precise. She carried no lamp. "Miss Pratt," Holmes said gently. She looked between us, expression unreadable. "You placed the knife here again," she said. "Why?" "To draw out the one who needed it. To vanish." She nodded slowly. "It was a clever trick. And you knew I couldn't resist." "Because guilt," Holmes said, "always returns to the place it bloomed." A pause. "Does Gregson know?" Holmes shook his head. "Not yet. That's up to you." She sighed an old, tired sound. "I never meant to kill him." Holmes didn't. "Move. Tell us." She stepped toward the bench and sat. "I followed him into the maze. That part is true. I knew about the passage. I'd used it myself, more times than he ever realized. I thought he was unraveling, talking of voices, memories, in the hedges. I thought he would hurt himself. But he didn't," I said. No, he waited for me. He knew I'd come. He accused me of betraying him. Said I was conspiring with Orson, that I was trying to poison the heart of his work. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a priest of his own madness. Her voice cracked. He lunged. Not with a knife, with words, with everything he'd held over me. And there was a spade, a gardener's tool. I don't even remember picking it up. But the next moment, he was on the ground. Silence. Holmes stepped forward. And the knife? I found it in the shed later. Used it to make the wound look like something else. Something planned. Then I planted the monogrammed cloth. I thought Clay could take the fall. Or Orson. She stared at her hands. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted to stop him. Holmes nodded slowly. You used the one place he revered against him. She nodded. He always said the maze should reveal truth. I suppose ... it did. Holmes looked at me. Then, softly, Gregson will take you in, but I will speak for you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not sob. She simply stood. I'll go, she whispered. Holmes remained still as she walked, out of the clearing alone. Only when she was gone did he speak. She killed him, yes, but the murder began long before the spade struck. I asked quietly, when? When he turned his mind into a prison, Holmes said, and made everyone else the warden. He looked toward the center of the maze one last time. Come, Watson, this garden has bloomed enough. Chapter 12. The moment of recognition. The following morning, the drawing room was uncharacteristically warm. The storm had passed in earnest, leaving the windows streaked with sun and the garden sparkling with dew. Yet the house was no less heavy. It was the silence of aftermath, the hush that falls when revelation drains the energy from every wall and every step. Miss Evangeline Pratt had been taken quietly into custody at dawn. Gregson, grim but composed, had her escorted by carriage to Marlborough, where she would remain until charges could be formally drawn. Holmes had said little during the process. He offered a short statement, confirmed the key evidence, and then stepped away, as though the machinery of justice no longer interested him. Now he sat opposite me, arms folded, gaze turned not to the fire, but to the maze visible through the eastern window. You still look troubled, I said at last. I am, he murmured, because a truth confessed is not always a truth complete. I leaned forward. You doubt her story? No, I believe she struck the blow, but I do not believe that moment was hers alone. He tapped a finger on the table, once for each. Thought. She did not go to the maze with a weapon. She did not plan the staging. She did not even know he would be there. She was lured, provoked. And the one who provoked her is still here. I blinked. But who else would have benefited from Giles's death? The estate passes to no heir. Lady Frances retains only a caretaker's interest. Holmes gave a faint smile. We must stop thinking of this as a matter of inheritance. This was never about land or fortune. Then what? Legacy, Watson, the kind that hides in books and reputations. The kind that poisons quietly for years and only reveals itself when it feels threatened. At that moment, the door opened. Lady Frances entered. She moved with her usual grace, but her face was drawn tighter than before. Not grief. She had already buried a brother once in her heart, but anticipation. You wish to speak with me? She asked Holmes. Yes, he replied, gesturing to the seat across from him. She sat without hesitation. Holmes folded his hands. Miss Pratt confessed to the murder. She has been taken into custody. You are now free from further involvement. In the inquiry, Lady Frances nodded slowly. Then I suppose my brother's story is over. Holmes tilted his head. Is it? She met his gaze. You don't believe it is. I believe your brother's death was the final act in a very old play. One that began when the maze was designed, not as a garden, but as a monument. To what? To shame. She did not speak. Holmes continued. Sir Giles created something meant to atone, but also to trap. He built the maze as a reflection of the human mind. Yes, but not his own. It was yours. She stiffened. I found letters, Lady Francis. Correspondence between you and a Mr. Rupert Kent, your fiancé once, I believe. The letters stopped abruptly. In 1874, that was the year he disappeared during the construction of the maze's outer foundations. She said nothing. He was reported missing after a sudden quarrel with Sir Giles, Holmes went on. The official version said he left England, but you never believed that, did you? Her eyes flickered. You mourned him quietly. And in the years that followed, you remained at Wilton Hall, not to tend to Giles, but to watch him, because deep down you suspected something. She looked down at her hands. He buried the truth, she whispered. And I let him. Holmes nodded. Because it was easier to accept guilt by silence than to unearth something too terrible to name. She finally looked up, her voice hollow. He told me Rupert had tried to blackmail him, that he was dangerous. I didn't know what to believe. When Rupert vanished, Giles said he had left for the Americas. I wanted to believe it. I needed to. But your brother never forgot, Holmes said. He built the maze to hold a secret. The center his reckoning was his punishment and protection. He sat in the eye of his own guilt. Lady Francis's voice trembled. I think he wanted to be killed. He wanted someone to uncover the truth. Evangeline, she was devoted to him. But she also saw what he had become. She saw the rot. Holmes gave a slow nod. She struck the blow. But you lit the path. Silence fell. Then she asked, almost inaudibly, Will you tell the authorities? No, Holmes said. Miss Pratt will face justice for the crime she confessed. But the history that led to it, that is not for the courts. And Rupert? Holmes's expression was grave. I suspect his remains lie somewhere beneath the original stonework of the maze. If the local authorities choose to excavate, they may find them, but that is no longer our affair. Lady Francis stood. Then perhaps Wilton Hall can sleep at last. As she turned to leave, Holmes said softly, Not all ghosts vanish with truth. Some walk slower. She paused, then walked out. That night, we dined in silence. Later, as we prepared to depart the next morning, Holmes lingered one last time on the edge of the maze. You see, Watson, he said, there are crimes that wear masks, but the worst are those that wear mirrors. I glanced toward the hedge walls, still symmetrical and soaked in morning dew. Will you write about this one? I asked. Holmes looked at me, then away. No, he said. Let it remain what it was, a garden of reflection. Chapter 13. The final attempt to escape. We departed Wilton Hall just after breakfast. A gray fog had rolled in again, more reluctant, then ominous, softening the outlines of the house and hedges as though trying to return them to dream. Our luggage had been sent on ahead to the Marlborough station, and Holmes and I took a slower path around the estate's southern boundary, where the soil turned loamy and the hedges thinned into woodland. Holmes walked with his hands behind his back, head lowered. He had spoken little since his final conversation with Lady Francis. The case, though technically resolved, had left an aftertaste, one not easily classified under deduction or justice. But we had not yet left Wilton. A commotion drew our attention as we reached the carriage path near the rear orchard. A constable came sprinting down the slope, coat flapping behind him, his face flushed. Mr. Holmes! Dr. Watson! Come quickly, Inspector Gregson needs you. Holmes was already striding forward. Where? The train station, Marlborough. There's been a development. The prisoner attempted to flee. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Miss Pratt? No, sir, Orson Hall. We arrived at the Marlborough holding station an hour later. The local magistrate's office, a squat brick building beside the rail line, was a hive of movement constables shouting instructions, a clerk waving papers, and a carriage tipped sideways into a drainage ditch beside the road. Gregson met us at the front steps, hair askew and coat dusted with gravel. He made a run for it, he said curtly, overpowered the man escorting him, and fled east toward the hills. We've got a perimeter forming, but the rain last night wiped half the tracks clean. Holmes was calm. Any signs of accomplice? None. But Gregson hesitated, then produced a letter, folded and sealed. This was found in his cell. Addressed to you. Holmes took the letter, broke the seal carefully, and read, Mr. Holmes, I have done many foolish things, but the one I regret most is not speaking the truth sooner. I did not kill Sir Giles, but I did return to the maze that night not to steal, not to spy, but to finish something I began years ago. There is something buried beneath the northwest quadrant of the maze. A memory, a failure, a man. I cannot carry this weight any more. I am sorry I ran. O.H. Holmes read the letter twice. Then he looked up, expression unreadable. He knew. He said softly, he always knew. Gregson exhaled. We've got men searching the woodlands, but if he gets to the river, he may be lost. Holmes shook his head. He won't go far. He's not running away. He's running to something. I frowned. To what? To bury his name in the same earth where another man's lies were planted. By mid-afternoon, the search had narrowed to the marshlands near the northern edge of Marlborough, a patch of bog and broken reed, where the land dipped and twisted, and old ruins from Roman times lay crumbling under moss-dot. It was there we found him. Orson Halley was crouched beside an outcrop of stones, sleeves soaked, hands raw with dirt. He had been digging feverishly, almost ritualistically using only a broken trowel and his bare fingers. When Holmes stepped forward, Halley looked up, not with fear, but relief. I didn't want to hide any more, he said simply. I thought ... If I could unearth the truth, maybe it would stop chasing me. Holmes approached slowly. What were you digging for, Mr. Halley? He gestured behind him. The original maze plans. Sir Giles destroyed the public version, but I kept fragments. There was a void under the northwest quadrant, unexplained in the blueprints. I thought ... maybe he put him there. Rupert Kent, Holmes said. Halley nodded. I heard the name once. From Frances. Giles told her he'd gone abroad. But she didn't believe him. Neither did I. Holmes crouched beside him. You weren't guilty of the murder, Mr. Halley, but you were guilty of staying silent. You watched him unravel. You saw the signs. I was afraid, Halley said, tears now tracing the grime on his cheeks. He destroyed everything I built, my name, my research, my trust. I hated him, but I also ... needed him to be right. About the maze, about everything. Holmes rested a hand on his shoulder. Sometimes the truth must be buried to protect a person, but more often it is buried to protect a lie. Halley was taken into custody once more, this time without resistance. Holmes requested that no charges be pursued beyond the escape attempt. The magistrate agreed on the condition that Halley remain in town until the matter was officially closed. On the ride back, I sat beside Holmes in silence. Only as we neared the edge of Wilton Hall's long gravel drive did he finally speak. This case, Watson, has unfolded not as a question of how a man was killed, but why others stood by and watched his soul decay. I nodded slowly, and because of that silence, a woman broke. Holmes looked out the window. Justice is rarely a straight path. In this case, it curved, coiled, ... like a maze. But in the end, we found the center. And what did we find? There? Holmes's voice was low. A man who spent his life punishing himself and left behind others to finish the task. Chapter 14. Holmes closes in. A final clue revealed we returned to Wilton Hall under a sky scraped clean by wind, the hedgerows gleaming as though freshly polished by the weather itself. The grounds bore no evidence of the storm or the revelations that had swept through them in the preceding days, no sign that a man had been murdered, that old secrets had stirred, or that a delicate thread of guilt still curled beneath the stone. And yet, as Holmes and I disembarked from the carriage, I could feel it. The estate was no longer at rest. Holmes did not pause to speak with Gregson or to inquire about Miss Pratt's transfer. He walked directly toward the maze, cutting across the lawn with the precision of a blade. I followed in silence, knowing this final act, whatever it would be, had already begun in his mind. "We have circled the maze from every angle," he said as we reached its threshold. "We've studied its walls, its construction, its psychology. But there remains one place we haven't fully examined." "The center?" I asked. "No," Holmes said. "The outermost edge. The place where things enter, but never return." We entered through the gardener's gate, long since unbolted by Gregson's men. Holmes traced the path along the outer, rim barely a few feet between the hedgerow and the rusted perimeter fence. The earth was soft, and in some parts the gravel had given way to moss. Here, at the margins, the maze was weakest, and yet it had held its secret longer than the center ever could. Holmes stopped abruptly near the northwest quadrant, the same area Orson Holly had mentioned. "Look here," he said, pointing to a knot of roots near the base of the hedge. "Something unnatural." I crouched beside him. The roots had indeed been disturbed, but what caught Holmes's eye was not the soil, but the stones embedded in it too angular, too regular. He retrieved a trowel from his coat, a habit of preparedness I never questioned, and began to dig. Moments, we struck something hollow. Wood. Carefully. Holmes pried it loose. It was a small rotted box sealed with a rusted clasp. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay several sheets of parchment and a single item that made me draw breath. A locket, tarnished but unmistakably feminine. Holmes unfolded the parchment slowly, his brow furrowed as he read. "What is it?" I asked. He held it out. It was a letter dated nearly 20 years earlier. The signature at the bottom read, "Rupert Kent. Francis, I beg you, do not let Giles do this. He fears the exposure of his work. Yes, but it is more than that. He has begun to believe the maze is no longer a design, but a mind. His mind. I have seen the drawings, his notes on punishment, on guilt, on pathways that lead not outward, but inward. There is something he is hiding in that design, and I fear it is not merely mathematical. If he refuses to stop, I will take the matter to the Royal Society. I have the documents to prove it, but I would rather save him. Please, speak to him. End this before it consumes you both. R. Below the letter, folded separately, was a set of early blueprints, more rudimentary than those in Sir Giles's study. These showed not only the maze, but what lay beneath it, a sub-foundation, reinforced at 4 key nodes, one directly beneath the center. Holmes stared at the plans, then at the locket, and finally at the earth. "Sir Giles never destroyed Rupert Kent," he said. "He sealed him." "Buried him beneath the maze?" "No," Holmes said. "He buried the truth. Kent may well have fled or vanished of his own accord. But this box was hidden not to mislead, but to warn. Kent left it for Francis. She never found it. Or she did," I murmured, "and buried it again." Holmes gave a grim nod. "That is the final thread. Francis suspected or knew that Kent had uncovered something terrible in Giles's mind. A dark theory, a spiral of obsession. And so she allowed Giles to complete the maze, I said, knowing that it would collapse in on him. Holmes placed the letter back in the box and stood. It is a rare thing, Watson, when a structure becomes a confession. But Giles built himself a confessional that no priest could absolve. As we returned to the matter, a figure emerged from the West Terrace. Lady Francis. She was dressed in walking clothes, her silver brooch clasped at the throat. She stopped as she saw us, then slowly descended the steps. "You found it," she said. It was not a question. Holmes held up the box. "You knew it was there." Her silence was answer enough. "I tried," she said softly, "to stop him. But he was already gone by the time the hedges were planted. He didn't want to be cured. He wanted to be remembered." Holmes met her gaze. "And you helped him forget." She smiled faintly. "You once said guilt wears mirrors. You were wrong, Mr. Holmes. It wears gardens." Holmes said nothing. He handed her the box, then turned and walked back inside. That night, Holmes stood by the fire in our shared rooms, pipe unlit, hands behind his back. I approached him with 2 cups of tea. "It's over now." Holmes didn't reply for some time. Then he said, "Watson, have you ever wondered whether solving a case simply reassembles the lie?" I frowned. "Isn't truth the opposite of that?" "No," he said quietly. "Truth is what remains after the lies are named." He turned toward the window, where the maze shimmered faintly in the moonlight. "And sometimes," he added, "the most dangerous truths are those that lie in wait ... at the very edge of reason." Chapter 15. The final gathering 2 days later. Under the faded gold of an autumn sun, the inhabitants of Wilton Hall were summoned one last time. It was Holmes's request delivered with no fanfare, no explanation, only a note handed to Lady Francis. Inspector Gregson, Miss Evangeline Pratt's attending solicitor, and the recently released Orson Hall. The drawing room had been rearranged, its furniture pushed to the sides to allow for a full view of the hearth. The fire had not been lit. The windows, tall and severe, let in a chill that matched the mood. Holmes stood by the mantel, arms folded, gaze steady. I sat at the far side of the room, notebook in hand, the observer once more. Though the case had, in every official sense, been closed, I knew Holmes well enough to understand something remained, and he would not let the threads rest until every one had been placed in its proper weave. "I thank you all for attending," Holmes began, his voice calm but carrying. "You are not here to witness an accusation, nor to relive the violence that ended Sir Giles Montgomery's life. You are here because each of you knowingly, or not, contributed to the architecture of what occurred." No one spoke. He turned first to Lady Francis. "You knew your brother's brilliance masked something darker. You allowed the maze to be built not only from hedges and symmetry, but from silence. You suspected he had done harm. You may even have believed he deserved punishment. But you said nothing. Your crime, if we can call it that, was omission." She did not flinch. "And if I had spoken? Then perhaps none of this would have happened," Holmes said. "Or perhaps it still would have. But truth, Lady Francis, is not a tree that grows in shade." He moved to Orson Hawley. "You, sir, returned to Wilton not to kill, but to reclaim your dignity, something Sir Giles stripped from you, in public and in print. You suspected what lay beneath the maze. You feared it. But still you chose silence, cloaking your knowledge in distance." Orson lowered his head. "I was afraid." Holmes nodded. "Yes, and fear, when left too long unattended, often becomes complicity." Then he turned toward the solicitor. "Miss Pratt has accepted her guilt in full. She struck the fatal blow. But she was driven there, nudged along a path by layers of manipulation and personal fracture. The court will determine her fate. But the maze she walked was built by others." "And you," Holmes said, his eyes now on Lady Frances once more. "You watched it happen. You understood the moment of collapse was inevitable, that Giles had curated his own reckoning. And yet, did you ever think it would claim someone else?" Lady Frances spoke, her voice cool and even. "I thought it would end with him." "Nothing ever ends neatly," Holmes replied. "But what we can do, what we must do, is understand how we got there." He stepped forward now, producing the weathered box we had unearthed beneath the outer maze. He opened it with care, revealing the letter from Rupert Kent and the worn locket. "This," Holmes said, holding the letter aloft, "is the key. Kent was not murdered by Sir Giles, as some suspected, but his disappearance and Giles's subsequent mental decline are linked. Kent threatened to expose Giles's theory, a belief that the maze could trap guilt in structure. Kent saw the danger in it, and for that he was cast out, silenced not by violence, but by erasure. He turned to the others, and thus Giles became prisoner of his own geometry. He did not kill Kent, but he killed the idea of Kent, and in doing so, he created a house of mirrors, wherein every person who entered saw some distorted reflection of themselves. Silence stretched like a wire between them all. Gregson finally spoke. "So what happens now?" Holmes placed the letter back in the box and closed it. "We leave. The dead are gone. The living must decide how to carry what remains." Gregson nodded slowly. "You'll be returning to London, then?" "This afternoon," Holmes said. "I believe we've seen all Wilton Hall has to offer." Back in our rooms, I packed in silence. Holmes moved with quick efficiency, stowing the last of his papers and sealing the box to be handed to the magistrate. "Do you think she'll ever confess the rest?" I asked him. He looked up. "Lady Frances?" I nodded. Holmes considered it. "Perhaps not aloud. But she has lived within the maze longer than any of them. Whether she speaks or not, she will not forget." As the carriage pulled away from Wilton Hall, I glanced back once. The hedge maze stood still, its green walls now golden at the edges, touched by the season's turn. It no longer looked menacing. Only tired. Holmes followed my gaze. "The human mind," he said, "is its own maze. The problem is not getting lost within it." "What is it, then?" He looked ahead. "It's mistaking the exit for the beginning." Chapter 16. The Reveal. Holmes breaks down the crime. It was not until we were comfortably seated back in our Baker Street lodgings, fire stoked, windows drawn, the familiar hum of London life pressing faintly against the glass, that Holmes finally permitted himself the luxury of detachment. He lay stretched across the chaise lounge, hands folded beneath his chin, eyes half closed. For the first time since we had left Wilton Hall, I saw the full weight of the case settle into the signal. Folds of his mind, not as tension, but as resolution. "You've been quiet," I said, setting down my notebook. "We never did make the matter entirely plain. Not to Lady Frances, not to Miss Pratt, not even to Gregson." Holmes gave a slight hum. They were each too entangled to hear it clearly. "But you, Watson, you were always the intended audience." I reached for my pen. "Then begin." Holmes sat upright and gestured toward the fire. "Let us reconstruct it, not from the scene, but from the center of the mind of Sir Giles Montgomery." He stood and began pacing slowly. Sir Giles was a man consumed by the idea of containment, not merely of plants or landscape, but of human weakness, of guilt. He believed, as he once wrote in a now destroyed monograph, that the architecture of thought could be externalized, that by constructing a space of sufficient complexity and symmetry, one could, in theory, trap emotional conflict within its boundaries. "The maze," I said. Holmes nodded. "Yes, but not a maze for pleasure or retreat. A maze as penance, his own mind mapped in shrubbery. And at its center, not peace, but judgment." I frowned. So he designed it to punish himself, precisely. But he lacked the courage for confrontation. That's where the others came. In. He stopped before the fire. Lady Frances knew something was wrong. Whether she found Rupert Kent's letter or merely suspected the truth, she chose silence. Her loyalty to the family name overrode her moral instinct. And so she stood by while the maze rose from the earth stone by stone, hedge by hedge. Shrine to her brother's growing madness. And Orson Hall? A victim. A gifted student who became a mirror. Giles saw in him a mind too sharp, too skeptical. Halley noticed the design's inconsistencies, questioned its psychological foundations. And for that, Giles destroyed his reputation, accused him of theft, banished him before he could voice the full danger of what was being built. And Miss Pratt? Holmes's expression darkened. The perfect acolyte, loyal, precise, emotionally isolated. She didn't see what was happening until too late. But when she did, when Giles began to speak of being watched, of hearing footsteps in the hedges, of seeing shadows at the maze's center, she tried to intervene. I leaned forward. So she followed him that night. And then she found him waiting, Holmes said, not reading, not reflecting, waiting, likely armed with accusations, half-mad proclamations, perhaps even an attempt to cast her as his final betrayer. She panicked, I murmured. No, Holmes said. She acted. Calmly. Too calmly. That's what makes it so tragic. It wasn't a fit of passion. It was clarity, a moment of terrible decision. He paused. She killed him with a nearby. Tool, probably one left by Clay or forgotten in a trimming round. Then she realized what she'd done. And in that same moment, her training, her precision, her logical mind took over. She removed the weapon, replaced it with another one already. Stained. She knew where Clay kept his cloths. She planted the monogrammed one. And then she exited the way she had come, through the hidden passage in the hedge. All of which she admitted, I said. Eventually, Holmes nodded. Yes, but she omitted one thing. I looked up. She didn't go there alone. Holmes said softly. Someone sent her. I felt a chill. Lady Frances. Exactly. Perhaps not in so many words. But the invitation to the maze that evening, Giles's presence, the confrontation, it was staged. Not by chance, but by orchestration. Frances wanted her brother to be faced. Whether it was by Evangeline or by the past, she didn't care. But she wanted a reckoning. Holmes stepped toward the window, the light catching the edge of his profile. And so we come to the heart of the matter. Not who struck the blow, but who prepared the altar. I sat back. Then what of the evidence? The second attack on Miss Pratt, the planting of the knife after the murder? Holmes turned. That was Orson High, returning in the night. Not to harm, but to redirect. He feared being implicated. Feared that Miss Pratt might eventually turn suspicion on him. So he attempted to guide the investigation toward Clay. A cowardly act, but not a violent one. And the final note, I said. The one left in the box? Rupert Kent's letter, Holmes said. The only voice from the past to speak plainly. He saw what Giles was becoming. And he tried to stop it. Holmes paced once more. In the end, this was not a mystery of blood, but of buried will. The maze was not the crime scene. It was the weapon. A construct of repression, handed down, shaped by fear, and eventually made lethal by proximity to the wrong soul at the wrong moment. I closed my notebook slowly, and so we return. Yes, Holmes said, to the same place we began. A man, alone in a garden, he could not escape killed not by a stranger, but by the echo of his own design. He moved to his chair, and sank into it with a sigh. There, Watson, I have told it all. And what now? I asked. Will you write to the magistrate? No, Holmes said, closing his eyes. The law has what it needs. Let history sort the rest. A quiet fell between us, and after a long pause, he added so softly I nearly missed it. Even the cleverest maze leads nowhere if you walk it long enough. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The wheels of officialdom turn slowly in such matters. But by the first week of November, the inquest into Sir Giles Montgomery's death had concluded. Miss Evangeline Pratt's confession, corroborated by evidence and Holmes's written statement, led to a verdict of manslaughter rather than murder. The magistrate, clearly swayed by the psychological strain and the moral complexity of the case, recommended leniency. She was sentenced to 2 years in a private facility near Surrey, with the possibility of early release based on mental health evaluations. The newspapers, as expected, distilled the matter into something more palatable. May's mad genius found dead. Secretary confesses in grief-fueled breakdown. There were few mentions of Sir Giles's experimental philosophies, fewer still of the garden's more symbolic architecture, and none at all of the letter from Rupert Kent or the dark theoretical ideas buried beneath the hedges. And that, perhaps, was for the best. Holmes refused to speak to the press. Gregson gave a brief interview, during which he gave Holmes grudging credit for insightful fieldwork, though he claimed the resolution had been largely procedural. I didn't correct him. One afternoon in early winter, we sat in our familiar sitting room at Baker Street, the fire crackling low. Outside, the streets were choked with carriages and early holiday bustle. I found myself reviewing my notes, the final lines of the Wilton case still unpenned. I find myself unsure of how to end it. I admitted aloud. Holmes looked up from the Persian slipper where he kept his tobacco. The story? Yes, everything's resolved technically, but it doesn't feel finished. Holmes considered this. That's because the conclusion happened long before the murder. You're looking for closure in the final act, when the first scene contained the seed. Then how do you explain that to the reader? He smiled faintly. You don't. You let the reader walk the maze themselves. If they are attentive, they'll reach the same center. I paused. Do you regret letting Lady Frances go unchallenged? Holmes tapped ash from his pipe. There was nothing to charge her with. She did not conspire. She merely stood back. And yet you hold her responsible. Responsibility, Watson, is not a legal term. It is a moral one, and morality is rarely enforceable. I sat back, studying him. You admired her, in a way. He gave a dry chuckle. I respected her clarity. She understood that madness, when cultivated in silence, does not stay in one mind. It spreads, like ivy, like guilt. There was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson brought in the morning Post. Among the letters was one marked with the seal of the Wiltshire court. Holmes opened it, read for less than a minute, and handed it to me. It was a short note from the attending magistrate. Rupert Kent's remains had been found, after all, beneath the original northeast support stone of the maze, not the northwest, as Kent's map had implied. A shallow grave. The bones were partially disintegrated, but the signet ring on his left hand bore his initials. So it had happened after all. Giles had killed Kent, or had allowed him to die, and buried the evidence in earth and hedgerow, then built his maze over it. He hid him, I said slowly, then tried to build a moral fortress around the guilt. Holmes nodded. Precisely. The maze was his sanctuary and his cell. I stared into the fire. Will they reopen the case now? To what end? Holmes asked. The man is dead. The confession buried. Frances will not speak. And the others are gone. He rose and moved to the window, parting the curtains slightly. Justice, he said, is often mistaken for punishment. But true justice is a reckoning and internal one. Giles had his. Frances still lives with hers. And Evangeline hers. Will come in dreams, not verdicts. I returned the letter to the envelope. Would you have handled it differently? I asked. He turned back, eyes gleaming in the dim light. No, this case was never about preventing a crime. It was about revealing one that had already taken root. He returned to his chair, pipe now lit, curls of smoke drifting upward. I've come to believe, Watson, that the most dangerous crimes are not those committed with weapons, but those built slowly with silence, with neglect, with secrecy dressed as loyalty. I made a note of the phrase. Do you think we'll encounter something like it again? Holmes smiled faintly. The world is full of gardens, my friend, and every garden has its shadows. We sat in quiet for some time, the fire dwindling to embers, the fog settling against the glass like breath. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, another case had ended, and yet the path lingered like the echo of footsteps, through hedges that had once led to a man who believed he could outthink remorse. He could not. No one ever does. Chapter 18. Holmes' final reflection. Winter settled over London with an icy patience. The sky hung low, pale as unblotted parchment, and the wind came down the chimneys like a whisper of unfinished sentences. At 221B Baker Street, life resumed its habitual rhythms. Mrs. Hudson hummed carols in the stairwell. The street outside bustled with the usual chaos of year's end. But inside, Holmes was still a rare state for a mind so tireless. He sat at his desk, not with a newspaper nor his violin, but with a small brown envelope. It had arrived 2 days earlier, no return address, no seal, just his name written. In a hand he knew instantly, Evangeline Pratt. I watched from the hearth, uncertain whether to speak. The envelope remained unopened on the blotter, as though Holmes were deciding whether its contents were an ending or a continuation. She writes from the facility in Surrey, he said at last, not looking up. Apparently she's taken up teaching arithmetic to the younger patients. I said nothing. She says the nightmares have faded, that the maze only comes now in fragments. No center, no paths, just green silence. Do you believe her? Holmes turned the envelope once, more, then set it aside. I believe she is trying, and perhaps that is all one can do when the structure collapses. I shifted in my chair. It still unsettles you. Of course it does, he replied, standing and crossing to the window. The city glimmered beneath the dusk street lamps, flickering to life, snow beginning to gather along eaves and rails. You solved it, Holmes. Every thread, every deception. He turned, his expression calm. But at what cost? We revealed a truth that had already ruined lives. We simply named it, dissected it. He paused, fingers steepled beneath his chin. There is a part of me, Watson, a cold, logical part that finds beauty in the design of it all, the symmetry of guilt, the precision of silence. And the human heart? I asked quietly. Holmes's gaze softened. It remembers that the most dangerous prisons are not built of bars or walls, but of memory, and that no maze, no matter how cleverly built, can ever truly contain a crime born in the mind. We sat together in the fading light, the fire warming the edges of our shared quiet. Outside, the snow thickened, softening the world. Inside, Holmes finally spoke again, almost to himself. She never meant to kill him. Not really. No. I agreed, but she did. Holmes nodded. Because in the end, the center of the maze was not a place. It was a choice. I rose and placed the envelope on the mantel. It remained unopened. As I reached for my coat, Holmes lit his pipe. The scent of tobacco curled into the room like a familiar fog, and I understood that this case, unlike many, would linger with us both. Not for its cleverness, nor even its tragedy, but for the clarity it offered in reflection. A man built a maze to hold his guilt. Another woman walked its paths and found herself. And Holmes, Ever the observer had followed not to judge, but to understand. Just before I opened the door, Holmes said, "One day, Watson, someone will write about this case. Not for the puzzle, but for the people." I turned. "Will it be you?" He smiled, just faintly. "No, I prefer my mirrors less clouded." And with that, the door closed behind me, and the echo of the maze, the green silence, the hidden passage, the weight of unseen footsteps, was left behind in the ruins of Baker Street, where all mysteries eventually come to rest.